In today's show, I'm looking ahead to the default fantasy playoffs strategies you need to help win your league. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com and at Yahoo Sports Australia. And you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Now, you know what? I probably should have done this video a little bit earlier. I know some playoffs have already started, but the default fantasy playoffs start Monday. So I apologize. I apologize for getting this video out later. I just, honestly, it sort of slipped through the cracks of what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks. So I do apologize for that, but we're here now. So let's talk fantasy playoffs. Now, if you're in a roto league, this doesn't apply to you. Some of this stuff does apply in a points league. It does. Some of it doesn't, because there's extra layers of nuance and strategy in a category league that we have to cover that doesn't apply to a points league. But the general principle will apply to any head-to-head league. With your playoffs starting next week, that is, again, the default setting that the playoffs will start next week. So let's talk about these things right now. The number one thing that is important to us here is the schedule. It is the bulk schedule. That's important, but it's the macro schedule and the micro schedule. So we can look at this and say the Clippers have 9 games over the next 3 weeks. That's not good for fantasy playoffs. Like that's not ideal when a bunch of teams have 12 games. You got the Wizards, the Thunder, the Mavericks, they got 12. Then you got the Clippers with 9, the Raptors with 10, the Knicks with 10, and the Wolves with 10. But it's not always just as simple as that, well, I can't deal with any Clippers players. I can't add any Clippers players. Because over a week, for example, the first week of the playoffs, the Raptors play 2 games. So Clippers players have more value than Raptors players next week. They have the 3 games this week, the Clippers, and especially when you're adding guys who might be streaming options, Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, maybe Ivica Zubac, Nick Batum, Marcus Morris. 2 of those 3 games for the Clippers, and I'm not just trying to focus on the Clippers here, but 2 of those 3 games for the Clippers fall on low volume days. So you can use those players that week. Yeah, and that's important to note as well, because when we're talking about, now it is different for guys like Paul George and Kawhi at the top who lose a lot of value over this period just because of the lack of games played, and they're probably going to rest some time, although given that their schedule is the lightest of anybody over those next 3 weeks, maybe there aren't any rests for the Clippers. Maybe those guys play through all those 9 games, and then Gianni in his 11 games and Jokic in his 12 and Embiid in his 12 turn into 10 because they're sitting guys out. Probably unlikely for Jokic, but maybe Embiid. Maybe Doncic's 12 games turn into 10 games. Beal's 12 games turn into 10 games. And then the difference there is not, we can't predict that stuff is what I'm trying to say. Now, obviously, Paul George and Kawhi Leonard can't play more than 9 games, but those other guys can come back to the field a bit. But knowing your schedule is super important. Being able to understand where, if you're adding players, can you use them? For this week coming up, the Thunder have 3 games. That's great. They've got 12 games over this fantasy playoff period. Like that's well, actually, do they have 12 or over 11? They've got 12 games over this fantasy playoff period. That's great. But only one of their games this week is on a low volume day. So your Lou Dort ad, your Darius Baisley flyer, your Alexei Pokusevski, Moses Brown, Isaiah Roby, Gabriel Deck, whatever in deeper leagues, Teo Maledon. Is it worth it? Probably not. I mean, you might actually play those guys once next week, where I can add Fanta Pants from the Hawks, and maybe that gets ruined by Collins and Hunter coming back. Won't be Reddish coming back. But they play 3 quality games. The Blazers, they have 3 quality games. Not that really matters for a lot of those guys, but I said Carmelo Anthony for scoring. You get 3 games out of him versus 1 Thunder player. Is that worth it more? The Pelicans play 3 games, and all of those are on low volume days. So Jackson Hayes, Kyra Lewis perhaps at that point. Eric Bledsoe definitely good value. The Magic, Mo Bamba, 3 quality games. You can use him in all 3 of those. Chuma Okeke, 3 quality games. It's only 3, but the 3 games out of him, is it better than 2 games out of, 4 games from the Suns when you got Jay Crowder, but you probably only use him 2? That's what you need to be aware of. And this is different for everybody. Look at how your roster shakes out. look at what days you actually have the open spots and where to maximize them. Because the point here is schedule. It's maximizing games played every week. And that is going to be very specific to your team, but how your team looks and the active roster spots you have and fitting those guys in. Streaming. Pretty much impossible to win in the playoffs if you're not streaming. I'll do it one more time. What the definition of streaming is. It means just getting 1 or 2 roster spots, adding a guy who plays, dropping him, adding a guy for the next day, dropping him, adding a guy for the next day, dropping him. Now, it depends if you have waiver acquisition limits for the week, meaning you can only add 4 plays. You need to be smart with doing that. But you need, again, schedule and streaming. You need to be able to get the right guy, the guys in for the most games, but also getting the right guys in. The guys that play, the guys that contribute to what you need. Because the big difference in the fantasy playoffs, in a category league, points league, this doesn't matter. In a category league, doesn't matter if you win 7-2 or 5-4. Doesn't matter. Makes no difference whatsoever. So win 5-4. Win 6-3 if you must, but win 5-4. So getting the right guys in. And that brings me down to punting. You might be, I'm so against punting. I'm against it. But again, in the playoffs, you need to win 5 categories. So you can be against punting, but I will guarantee you that in the playoffs, you will be punting something. You won't want to call it punting, but you will be saying, these are the categories that I'm going to win, so therefore the waiver moves that I make and the players that I've got are going to be we're going to be focused on those categories that I need. That's what punting is. You need steals because, look, I'm projected to win 4 categories super easy. I'm projected to get smashed in 4 other categories, but steals, it could go either way. So every acquisition I make is to get steals in. It's to focus on those 5 categories that you can win. And that's what punting is. It's focusing on the things that become your strengths. So you're going to need to, if you're anti-streaming and anti-punting to win in the playoffs, you need to do this to some degree. You cannot avoid it. You can't just say, just grab the best player overall and we'll see what happens and then we'll look at their schedule and they play 4 games and that's all well and good. So if you can't play the dudes and they don't contribute to winning, there's no point. Stashing is an interesting point, I think. Can't do it. Playoffs are do or die, mate. You got 1 week. You can't get someone who, DeAndre Hunter might be back in 2 weeks. Do I just grab him and stash him? Unless you have injured reserve, or you're grabbing a guy. I'm just waiting for this bloke to pop off. I'm waiting for, and I've said Isaiah Stewart, we hold him and we roster him. But if we get to next week and he's playing 20 minutes a night and Plum is still playing 28, you can't do it. You got to move on. You got to say, well, that's it. I tried it. I hoped it would come. It didn't come. We're done. Let's move on. Because we get more value from 7 games from that roster spot than 4 games of 20 minutes from Isaiah Stewart. He's 80 minutes play versus a guy that plays 22 minutes off the wire and plays 7 games, 140 plus minutes. It's a huge difference. Maybe you don't get 7 games. Maybe you get 5 games. Maybe you get 6 games. Whatever. It's more than what you get there. Stashing and waiting for that shit to go down is just not the right way to do it. And you got to be ruthless. You have to be ruthless. You're in a playoff. You don't have IR. James Harden's ruled out for say we get to Monday and James Harden's out all of that first week and half of the next week. They say he's going to be reevaluated another 10 days. Drop him. It sounds ridiculous. How can I drop James Harden, the number 1 or number 2 fantasy player? How can I do it? Because I can't do it. But you're not number 1 or number 2 if you're given donuts. If you're big zeros, you're not that guy. And while that's so, I can't win without him. I can't get through without him. But you can't win with him if he's giving zeros. Literally anything, even if it's Dwayne Bacon, will be better than the 0 that James Harden is giving you. It's a tough call to make, but you got to be ruthless. You have to look at this and go, this guy's got a back-to-back at the end of the week. He plays 3 games, he plays on a Monday, and then he doesn't play again. He's got a big gap until the end of the week. We even look at, say, the Lakers. They play on Monday next week, then they play Thursday, Saturday. You got a fringe Laker guy, Montrezl Harrell maybe, you cut him. Those 2 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, when no one plays, cut him. Maybe he's not the best example because he's cuttable anyway. But finding where those big gaps are, and there aren't many teams who have huge gaps in terms of 3 days with no games played. But the Raptors guys, they're in a real tough spot next week. So you can add Kem Birch and get excited for what he's doing. Chris Boucher with only 2 games next week. How do we hold on to him? Gary Trent, mate, Jack Armstrong, what do we do?
Get that garbage out of here!
You can't go into the week, wait 2 days for Gary Trent to play his first game on Wednesday, and then he plays another one after 2 days on Saturday. You can't. You got to move on. You might have to drop Fred VanVleet. You seriously, if you need it, might have to cut OG Anunoby. And that sounds sacrilegious, and I probably wouldn't because it's OG Anunoby. But Malachi Flynn's going to have no value. You can't deal with that stuff. You got to be ruthless. Injuries again, like I just said, you've got to be able to make calls, and you can look at it. Well, I've got no chance to win it all if I don't have these players, but you've got zero chance of winning it if you don't get through the first week of your playoffs. You literally can't. It doesn't matter. You can say, oh, but look, that Harden would have came back and I would have won if I had him. Doesn't matter because you're not there. Use your injured reserve spot and use your IL plus if you've got it. Spam it. Put a guy in. If Yahoo or ESPN is slow to update the status, bring the guy off your IR, slide him onto get a game played. After the game starts, put him back in your IR. You manipulate it. Use your IL plus. Any day-to-day guy, they move in, open a roster spot, stream someone else in, get them to play. You want to maximize games played, and you want to maximize the strengths in the categories you're trying to win. And in a points league, you're just trying to maximize fantasy points. It doesn't matter where they come from. It doesn't matter if you scrounged your way through points by getting 30 random points out of 3 Josh Hall games. It doesn't matter where they come from. You just need them. And that brings me to our next point. Need versus value. In a vacuum, Josh, who's got the most value? It means nothing. It doesn't mean anything. Value means nothing at this point. This guy can be ranked wherever, but Carmelo Anthony might score 20 points a game for 2 games and get killed on the court and provide nothing else. But if points is the category that you need, then it doesn't matter that he's ranked 250th. It matters that he gave you 20 points over 2 games and gave you 40 real-life points to add to your total. That ranking, well, you may have dropped the bloke who's 130th. Let's just use Montrezl Harrell, for example, to get a guy that's ranked 250th. But it doesn't matter because he provided the stats in the category that you need. Need versus value is so important. Value means nothing. It doesn't mean a single thing. Need is what you want. You need to plan ahead. This is along with schedule. This is and this all ties in. You need to plan ahead. Who is my opponent? What does their team look like? What are their strengths? What are my strengths? Project it out. Where am I going to win? Where am I going to lose? Where am I definitely going to win? Where am I definitely going to lose? Does he have an advantage of 6 more games played from out his base roster? And that doesn't even include for him streaming more guys in? Then you need to get vicious in cutting blokes and making the most. Getting the 2-for-1s. Add a guy because he plays a back-to-back. Add another guy because he plays a back-to-back. Every acquisition needs to be worth 2 games pretty much for you to get that in. But you need to plan ahead to see where that lies and how the schedule looks. Another thing with planning ahead is if you are winning the first week of your playoffs and it comes to Saturday, you got 3 ads left because it's been a cruise. Look to who your next matchup is because you will have 4-5 ads for the following week. Scan the system. Use your ads on the Saturday if you don't need them for this current playoff matchup. Use them now to load up on guys who have more favorable schedules in the semifinal week. Do the same thing if you're winning your semifinal leagues. If you're 7-2 up with 1 day left and you can't be caught really, make ads for grand final week. Make ads where the guys you got have got that great schedule in the final week of things. You've got to plan ahead. That 2-game week for the Raptors next week is rough. So, when you're making consideration of adding Malachi Flynn or adding Kem Birch, or adding Gary Trent, it's not going to do anything for you for next week. The week after, semi-final week, you look at, there's only, 5 teams that play 3 games. Warriors, Pacers, Pistons, Knicks, and Clippers. But there's 3 teams that play 5 games. So that makes the Raptors situation very interesting because they have 5 games. So, you need to look at after those 2 games, and then if you're up big in that first week, add your Raptors. Add your Bouchers and Birches and Flynns and get the 5 games. Add your Thunder guys, your Pokashevskis and Browns and Robies and those sort of players. And your Mavericks have 5 games, which I can guarantee you're not getting 5 out of Porzingis or 5 out of Doncic, but you might get 5 out of Brunson. You'll get 5 out of Tim Hardaway. You get 5 out of Finney-Smith. And they're great ads for that second week. Plan it ahead. But you got to look, and I can say you've got to be ruthless and you've got to be trying to win now. But if you're in a situation where my first round playoff matchup's easy as piss, or you've got a first round playoff bye, right? first round playoff bye, then you making every move for round 2. You're just adding up. You're getting Dallas guys. You're getting Thunder guys. You're getting Raptors guys. Although, to be fair, the Bucks and the Nets have only 4 games that week, and they're all on quality days, whereas the Mavericks, Thunder, and Raptors, they're all only 3 quality days. So adding a Bucks player, Bobby Portis, adding a Nets player, Bruce Brown, LaMarcus Aldridge, Jeff Green, might be worth more than like 3 games of Isaiah Roby. Bear that in mind. Planning ahead, super important. I hope this is helpful for you. Again, I do apologize for it not coming out a little bit earlier. Most of this stuff is pretty much common sense, but the key takeaways. Look at your schedule, max your games played, play to your strengths. You only need to win 5-4. Play to your strengths. Overall value doesn't mean anything. If you're like the guy asked me today, if you're punting assists and you've got Ja Morant and you're going to lose assists even with Ja Morant, what's he doing? Get rid of him. Who cares if he's on your team? He is hurting you. Get rid of him and get someone else in to help you in the categories you need. Guys, don't forget, follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and on Odyssey. And then on YouTube, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up, leave a comment down below, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.